When you used to get ready to watch your favorite superhero in a movie or show based on Marvel Comics, the worry that they were going to get adaptationally transitioned was usually pretty far from your mind. But now, especially in the MCU, gender swaps are becoming quite common, and for the most part, they only ever really go one way. And more often than not, if you try to complain about this happening to a character you like, you're gonna get called a chud misogynist, woman-hating sexist incel who thinks times was better when them dizzy dames didn't have the right to vote. But conversely, if you try to defend a gender swap by saying that most of these characters were created during a time with very different gender norms, and sometimes updates to reflect modern society are okay, you're gonna get called a woke-ass fake fan MCU tourist who is responsible for every single thing wrong in all of Western society. But here we're going to ignore all that chatter, because no matter your opinion, some gender swaps, specifically in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have been so stupid or poorly done that they've just ruined potentially popular characters, and sometimes even dragged entire movies down with them. So let's take a look at the top 5 worst gender swaps in the entire MCU, starting off with the one I feel did the most damage, Captain Marvel. In the comics, Mar-Vell was a captain in the Kree Empire who was sent on a mission to Earth to gather intelligence for a potential takeover. He takes on the human identity of Walter Lawson and poses as a scientist working for NASA, eventually meeting their security chief, Carol Danvers. Despite his mission, when he saw humans endangered, Mar-Vell uses his advanced Kree physiology, technology, and weapons to save lives, with onlookers mishearing the name Captain Mar-Vell as Captain Marvel, thinking he was a new superhero, something that becomes more true over time as he gains much greater powers and eventually replaces his Kree armor with a more traditional superhero costume. And eventually, due to his increasing feelings for the people of Earth, specifically people like Carol, Mar-Vell is tried and sentenced to death for treason against the Kree Empire, though he soon after escapes. After Carol is taken hostage by the Kree, Mar-Vell comes to save her, and in the resulting battle, advanced Kree technology explodes and bombards Carol with alien radiation that gives her powers similar to his. Carol is inspired to use these new powers to become a hero as well, naming herself Ms. Marvel and eventually becoming a major member of the Avengers. Tragically, despite Mar-Vell's increasingly strong powers and many acts of heroism and self-sacrifice, he gets cancer, and all attempts to cure it prove hopeless. And after coming to terms with his inevitable death, Mar-Vell passes on, surrounded by his allies and even those enemies who'd come to respect him, with Carol continuing to honor Mar-Vell's heroic memory in the modern day as Ms. Marvel, much later on taking his superhero name Captain Marvel on in his honor. It's an interesting story, with the death of Captain Marvel still being one of the most famous Marvel stories of all time. And the MCU used Mar-Vell in a very similar way. He was a Kree soldier in disguise who was moved by humanity and his feelings for Carol to help save the Earth, rebelling against his own tyrannical empire. He was involved with Carol gaining her powers and then tragically dies, inspiring Carol to take on the name Captain Marvel in his honor. In an early version of the script for the Captain Marvel movie, that is. In the final movie, they wisely tossed all of that boring crap in the garbage and changed Mar-Vell into some random old lady who you only see in a flashback. That's a pretty drastic change to a pretty important character from Marvel lore. Surely there was a good reason for such a deviation. Well, don't worry, there is, because according to Kevin Feige himself on why they changed Mar-Vell's gender in the movie, it was really about the development of this story and about how best to showcase Carol Danvers' growth and development as a hero. And the notion that she had a female best friend, a female mentor, seems important to us. Which, for those of you who don't understand what the hell he's mansplaining here, let me translate for you. The story of this movie is female empowerment. If we showcase Carol's character growth and heroic identity as being inspired by or dependent on a male friend and mentor, then this would not be a female empowerment story. Because a woman in a story who benefits from or depends on a man did not actually earn her role as the story's main character. Because apparently the only way a woman can earn or achieve anything on her own is without men? Yeah, so they were so fixated on making this a girl power story, I guess they circled right back into overt sexism. They made a huge deal behind the scenes of this being the first female-led movie in the MCU. And from the beginning, in all the interviews, you see the words female, woman, and girl over and over, as if it's the most and only important aspect of Carol's entire character. And so they didn't want the MCU Carol's entire superhero identity to be inspired by a man who she'd fallen in love with. What kind of message would that be for the young girls watching? That humanity is at its best when we're moved by the love and inspiration we feel from each other to become the best versions of ourselves? Oh, God, that would have been so sexist. So, in their effort to have Carol stand on her own without leaning on no man, Mar-Vell's human identity is swapped from Walter Lawson to Wendy Lawson. But that's not all. Instead of being a loyal member of the Kree military who rebels against them to protect humanity, she's a scientist who's already left the Kree and is already hiding out but really has no connection to Earth. Instead of gaining immense powers or having high-tech weapons that she uses to become a superhero and save lives, she's just a seemingly regular lady who tinkers with ship engines. Instead of tragically dying due to an incurable disease, she's unceremoniously shot off and killed in a flashback. And instead of being an important and inspiring part of Carol's backstory, she's a minor flashback character who is treated more like a plot device to give Carol powers than a freaking character. Honestly, they could have just straight up cut her out of the movie. If Carol had just found some random crashed alien tech that exploded and gave her powers, the plot would not have been all that different. So why does changing Mar-Vell's gender necessitate changing all of that as well? Well, they couldn't have a female Mar-Vell stay a badass Kree soldier who turns against the Kree for one simple reason. That would have been way too interesting of an arc and make her way too goddamn cool, which in their minds could accidentally make this female Mar-Vell a competitor to Carol for the audience's attention. So while changing the character's gender, they also harvested up Mar-Vell's entire plot and character and awkwardly transplanted it over to Carol, thinking that it would give her the cool points a male or female Mar-Vell would have. So here you go, girls. A man turned into a woman and then made less powerful, less important, and old so that your new hero won't have to compete with her. You did it, Kev. You cured sexism. Next up is hands down the most hated gender swap in the entire MCU, if not in all of modern fiction, Taskmaster. Taskmaster is Anthony Masters. He has photogenic reflexes, allowing him to perfectly mimic any physical movement he sees, making him a master of virtually every fighting style and weapon. He sells his skills to the highest bidder as a mercenary and has faced virtually every major hero in the Marvel Universe, sometimes even teaming up with them if it serves his interest. Mix in a memorable costume with a skull mask and white cape, his array of weapons including a sword, bow, and shield, all mastered by watching the likes of Captain America and Hawkeye, as well as his confident, laid-back, and eager to test himself personality, and you have a character who many fans were excited to see in the MCU when he started appearing in trailers for Black Widow as a badass mercenary hunting her down. Especially after previous depictions of the character outside comics like Marvel vs. Capcom, Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble, Spider-Man PS4, and other adaptations had already shown just how cool he could be to a wider audience. But it became quickly apparent while watching the movie that his entire personality and character had been replaced with just nothing at all. But any annoyance fans felt at that was nothing compared to what fans felt after this character, who is a male in the source material, was advertised as being a male in this movie's marketing, clearly has a standard male build, and is literally played by a male the majority of the time that this suit is on screen, removes that helmet and reveals that he is actually, oh my god, a female. What? Why? Taskmaster is a pretty popular character both in and out of comics. What was the reason for this? Well, when most of us imagined a film about Black Widow, we likely imagined a badass spy movie, like a James Bond with a little Charlie's Angels flair added in. And that's why we thought her fighting a badass but relatively grounded mercenary villain like Taskmaster would fit right in. But not Hollywood. They're much more enlightened than us simple-minded inbred yokels, you see. Where we only see Black Widow as a character, they see her as what she really is, a female. Meaning, this would be a movie starring a female, which means that every aspect of the plot must be tied to her gender. Now, I don't really want to even talk about this in the first place. I do not want to read this next part, but it explains every aspect of both the change and the plot they chose for this movie. And if I don't read it to you, I think you'll just suspect I'm making up some grifter BS in this whole section. So here's a quote by the producer and lead actress herself in an interview about how they came up with the plot and themes of this movie. Oh God, all right. At the very beginning of really seriously talking about what this could be about, it was right during the beginning of the #MeToo movement and felt like you cannot miss the opportunity to draw the comparison between these two things. She's been a victim of childhood trauma and exploitation, and it's a past that she doesn't want to face that she's running away from. And then her sister, who's this very self-possessed kind of firecracker liability in some ways, but person, who is fiercely independent, basically forcing her to come to terms with that, forcing her to face it. It felt very much like what is happening now. It was amazing to have the platform to be able to comment on that. So Black Widow, founding Avenger, one of the most popular heroes in the entire MCU, played by one of the most recognizable actresses in the entire world, when she finally gets her own solo movie, something fans have been demanding for years, they wrote the entire script to try to cynically capitalize on the popularity of the Me Too movement at the time. Ugh. Dreykov represents Harvey Weinstein and other men in positions of power within a patriarchal system, and the widows represent the real-life, abused, trafficked, and enslaved young girls who lose all autonomy to those men and are forced to act as nothing but objects controlled by them. Ugh. Leave it to Hollywood to hijack stories and characters created by other people to try to gaslight all of us into forgetting that it was Hollywood's creepy shit that started this whole movement in the first place. And so whenever poor Taskmaster got caught up in all of this, he was eventually gender swapped from Anthony to Antonia and completely changed to match this theme as well. Antonia is a woman trapped in the trauma she experienced as a young girl. She has no autonomy of her own. Her body exists solely for the ambition of a powerful man. Her name, voice, and personality have all been taken from her, and she has something external forced into her mind so this man can influence and control her every action. And at the end of the movie, Natasha defeats Dreykov, freeing Antonia from his control, and we hear the only line Taskmaster says in the entire movie, "Is he gone?" Bludgeoning us over the head with the theme that she had no voice at all until Natasha dismantled the patriarchal system of she was enslaved under. Well, I bet the writers felt so clever for this whole plot and really patted themselves on the back on the behalf of trafficked women everywhere. But I have to ask those writers, if you felt compelled to make Taskmaster a girl, why couldn't she still be a badass, confident, and capable mercenary? Why did she need to be a voiceless victim of men? And after all the hate and backlash that this choice got, the MCU did the only thing that made sense with this character. They had her gunned down unceremoniously in Thunderbolts. And while this bothers some fans of Black Widow who wanted to see what happened to the character next, and were sad to just see her killed off, just like her role in the first movie, this was actually a metaphor too. A metaphor for how when a character gets hijacked and rewritten to feed a writer's ego and make them feel so good for touching some random agenda, fans do not embrace the character, leading to that character being tossed in the frickin' garbage like the work of all these kinds of writers deserves to be. Now, it wouldn't be a video bitching about bad MCU adaptations without the Eternals, so next up we have Ajax. The Eternals were created by the King of Comics, Jack Kirby, to be a Marvel comic version of the myth and legend of old, reborn in the modern day. So most of them are named after and visually inspired by the various gods and heroes of myth. For instance, Circe, Icarus, Athena, and Makari are derived from the Greek stories of Circe, Icarus, Athena, and Hermes, known as Mercury to the Romans. And the group was originally fittingly led by Zurus, taken from Zeus, the king of the gods and ruler of Olympus in Greek myth. And Zurus was in early scripts for the movie as the group's leader, but he was kicked out when the writers realized that they had way too many characters for their, quote, writing skills to juggle, and they tossed Ajax into the leadership role instead. In the comics, Ajax is inspired by the Greek hero Ajax, as well as the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. And he's got a lot of elements that make him quite an interesting character, but none of that matters at all, because Ajax is not in this movie, as the character with that name in this movie shares literally nothing in common with the character except the name. Ajax in the MCU Eternals is basically just the role of Zurus with a new name tossed on. And somewhere along the line, they decided to swap Ajax/Zurus from male to female. Now honestly, when you swap a character's gender, how much actually changes besides just their design and build? But Zurus is not just a character. He's very specifically designed and named to evoke the archetype of Zeus. When you swap the gender of an archetypical character, you change a lot more than just the superficial. With that change, you're no longer bringing forth a well-tread vision of classic gods and heroes that we already associate thousands of years of story and legend to. Archetypes allow you to use icons of the shared cultural consciousness as the foundation of a new character, letting you tell new stories that already have all of these ancient ones we all know intrinsically well as their bedrock. We can instantly recognize and understand these kinds of characters without needing to learn much of anything about them. When Odin looks like our image of a god, Fendrel looks like a swashbuckling Robin Hood. When Red Skull's face is the literal image of death, we do not need to have these characters all that fleshed out or deeply explored. The writers don't have to put as much focus and story time on fleshing them out to interest us or explain their role in the overall story. But in this movie, because of the gender swap, we now do not see Ajax/Zurus as an immediately recognizable stand-in for Zeus. We see her as a brand new character. And as a new character, she needs to stand on her own. The story now needs to take time to flesh her out to the audience, to tell us why we should be connected to her, why we should respect her as the team's leader, and what the vibe of her character in this world is. But because the people writing this movie already had so much trouble juggling all of these other characters, she's basically just killed off and written out of the story before we get to know much of anything about her. We're basically just told she was the leader, we're told the team respected her, and boom. Had she just looked like our stock image of Zeus, we wouldn't have needed to learn a single goddamn thing about her to understand her, because we already know Zeus's entire deal. This is the entire purpose of an archetype in a story. It's a writing tool people like Jack Kirby were incredibly skilled with, using these recognizable stock characters to create some of the most well-remembered characters to this very day, a trick the writers of this movie seem to have never learned. Or maybe they did, as I suspect there may be a deeper reason for this change. Part of me believes that they may have looked at what the source material was doing with its roots in myth and decided to try to purposely subvert the recurring patriarchal leader archetype of those myths by gender swapping Zurus/Ajax, as if doing this can undo what they see as unconscious sexism within our shared cultural consciousness, by redefining what a powerful god leader is in our overall imagination, from a tall, muscular, bearded man into looking like Salma Hayek instead. But it didn't work. No one saw this movie, no one talks about this movie, the Eternals do not seem to be returning in Doomsday, and while humanity will still remember Zeus, Icarus, and Athena in 500 years, this Eternals movie will be about as well remembered in 10 as steel is today. And next up, we have probably the single most pedantic rant I have ever gone on with Kidpool. When the Deadpool Corps arrives in Wolverine and Deadpool, virtually all of the Deadpools that we see are just Deadpool in a random costume. You've got a world where Deadpool's a samurai, a world where Deadpool's a pirate, a world where he's Welsh, a world where Deadpool's a lady. Every Deadpool reinforces the same joke. That one word superficially tossed in front of the name Deadpool suddenly makes this an exciting new multiverse variant character. As if tossing a frickin' cowboy hat on a Deadpool costume is using the concept of the multiverse in any kind of interesting or worthwhile way. Something that we've literally seen out of What If in the MCU multiple times. These kind of characters are not characters. They're just stupid gimmicks. When they show that giant massive Kangs, and you've got a Lizard Kang, a Pharaoh Kang, and all these zany Kangs, and the fact that the entire MCU based themselves around the multiverse, with this being about the extent of their understanding of this, is the entire point of this joke in this movie. And the same is supposed to go for Kidpool, just a Deadpool from a world where the stupid gimmick is that he's a kid. In the comics, Kidpool is exactly that. A child version of Wade Wilson, who's a troublemaker at a version of the Xavier Institute where many of the X-Men are kids. Earth 616 Deadpool then arrives to recruit him into the Deadpool Corps alongside Dogpool, Ladypool, and Headpool. In the movie, Kidpool appears alongside the rest of the Deadpool Corps. But when he speaks, we hear that in the MCU, Kidpool isn't just a kid version of Deadpool. She's a foul-mouthed girl one. Now, am I going to sit here and try to convince you that this ruins the movie or is sacrilege to the sanctity of the comic version of the character, or even matters in any way whatsoever? Dear God, no. But I am going to tell you that this was as dumb of a choice as every other gender swap on this list for two simple reasons. First off, that was not the joke. These are all supposed to be superficially simple multiversal variants. You see a pirate or a monk Deadpool, you're not supposed to wonder what their character or Earth is like. You're supposed to think it's some stupid, poorly written pirate from some stupid, poorly written pirate Earth. You see Kidpool, and you're supposed to think this is just some stupid Earth where Wade Wilson's a kid for no real reason. That's it. But by making this version a girl as well, now, unlike every other Deadpool in this scene, she's two things instead of one. She's a girl pool and a kid pool. So instead of just being a simple, quick little joke, Kidpool becomes a slightly more complex and maybe even interesting character. Is she a girl kid pool, a kid lady pool, a protege sidekick pool, a daughter pool, an X-23 pool? The possibilities are endless, but none of that actually matters. The overall joke was not ruined, and I doubt anyone in the world really cared all that much, except the world's biggest Kidpool fan, who I assume left the theater fuming. Was it just that reason? Then she would not be on this list. Because honestly, who really cares? The second reason is why this is actually a bad gender swap. The majority of these Deadpool's designs originated in the comics, including some of the most obscure ones, including Kidpool. His design is lifted right out of the comics. So you have to ask, if they knew who he was, why did they actively choose to swap him into a girl? And the answer is, so one of Ryan Reynolds' daughters could play Kidpool. And that's it. It's not some attempt to subvert the source material. It's not some attempt to bring the enlightened values of Hollywood to the masses. It's not really even an insult to the fans. But it is still the same type of behind-the-scenes lack of care for the intent of the source material as all of the others we've done so far. Objectively, this is one of the dumbest gender swaps in the MCU for one of the dumbest reasons possible. So, my internet picker will not let this go. And now last, and most certainly least, we have the Blood Brothers. Blood Brother, meaning a man who has sworn to treat another man as his brother. Blood Brothers in Marvel, meaning Jarry and Rahos blood. Twin alien brothers with the ability to massively increase their strength and durability the closer they are in proximity to each other, but having those abilities decrease the further separated they are from each other. They usually serve as muscle for powerful villains like Thanos, but later on, one of them spent some time serving under the Hood's criminal empire. So when the Hood was adapted into Ironheart in the MCU, the show's writers were looking through lists of villains who'd worked for him to adapt into his gang and grabbed up the name, the Blood Brothers. But then they thought, whoa, brothers? Do we really want two entire males on this team? We don't want that. Do we really want that kind of toxic masculinity? We could accidentally start a patriarchy here. So they solved this very important problem by swapping one of the brothers into a girl, changing Jarry to Jerry with an I, and cured this Blood Brothers problem by renaming it the Blood Siblings. Wow, writing. You know, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking about the Blood Brothers in comics, but these kinds of situations really show the difference in creative levels between the original comic writers and the so-called writers of these adaptations. The comic writer just needed to come up with a new villain for Iron Man to fight, so he takes a well-known phrase that alliterates and out of thin air comes up with twin alien brothers with a blood-based bond who grow in strength based on their proximity. A fun gimmick for a visual and action-based medium like superhero comics. Years later, the modern show writer looks at a name on a list that some executive handed to him, grabs the name Blood Brothers up without bothering to read a paragraph synopsis of the character, and does the immense amount of work of changing the word brothers to siblings. And how does this change benefit or change the show's story? Well, it doesn't, because it didn't matter at all, because the Blood Siblings are barely even characters. Whether they were kept as brothers, changed to two sisters, or were swapped into a frickin' flamingo and a goddamn shoe, it wouldn't have made a difference. They're just two random mooks without personalities working for the Hood, whose biggest moment in the entire show is an extended frickin' White Castle advertisement, where they get beaten by Ironheart's White Castle Foo before being almost completely forgotten about. They took the name Blood Brothers and turned it into nothing, for the sole reason that they felt uncomfortable adapting in two entire males at once, as if the entire concept of brothers is misogynistic to them, and so fixed this overt sexism in classic comics by making them the Blood Siblings. Wow, good job, guys. It was an empty, hollow choice made due to the misandry of some random-ass writer in the hopes that their sad, pathetic life will gain some meaning if they can affect the world by making a couple nerds on the internet notice that they even exist by making them moderately annoyed. Well, you're welcome, Ironheart writers. Consider me officially moderately annoyed. And at the end of the day, it's the same for all of these changes. Because for all their bluster about giving girls someone to look up to or commenting on a woman's role in a man's world, that's the true reason we keep getting these random, pointless gender swaps. Because it's about the only thing that gets anyone to notice these weirdos slumming at writing someone else's work ever even existed. So there we go. If I didn't tear apart a gender swap you hated, let me know below. Disagree and think making Marvel a lonely old cat lady who just gets shot was way cooler than having her be an awesome space superhero? I'd love to hear your reasons why. Click that subscribe if you ain't yet, hit the like and leave a comment to please the YouTube gods, and if you like what we're doing here and want to support the channel more, click that join button to become a channel member. You get a shiny little badge thing when you make a comment, and you'll get the exclusive privilege of voting in monthly polls for an adaptation all ranked the following month. Alright, until next time, always remember, the best way to fight the patriarchy is by writing female characters who exist as nothing more than an empty vessel for the metaphors of your ideology. Girl power?